Before we go back, Mr. Lyon, I'm going to ask you once more to please speak slower.
I'll try to remember.
It won't make sense when I only write 2/3 of what you say.
Dr. Lyon, the transcript is the official record of the proceeding, which is why we focus on it. We're just making these delightful videos for fun. Let's see. Do we have your counsel handy? And then I can invite Mr. DeSalen to offer his questions. Ms. Paranos?
Sorry, I was having technical difficulties. I am here, just
right.
having issues with my audio.
And if you need to turn off your
Hang
camera,
on.
that's fine. I had to turn mine off this morning. So please go ahead and turn it off if you need to. Mr. DeSalen?
Can't hear you.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good. Good afternoon, Dr. Lyon. My name is Charles DeSalen. I'm an attorney representing the New Mexico Environmental Law Center. And I just have one very quick clarifying question for you. I want to go back to your testimony earlier about the proposal for enhanced Eldar for sources that are within 1,000 feet of an occupied area. Is it your understanding, Dr. Lyons, that the New Mexico Environmental Law Center also supports that proposal?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
All right, thank you very much. Any other counsel? Ms. Fox?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Hello, Dr. Lyon. My name is Tanis Fox. I'm with Western Environmental Law Center, and I represent the parties that we're calling clean air advocates in this proceeding. Thank you very much for your testimony. I just have a couple of lines of inquiry for you. And first is, Dr. Lyon, are you familiar with the testimony from Mr. Smitherin on a study on Eldar that was conducted by the American Petroleum Institute, surveying 13 operators?
Yes.
And Mr. Smitherin said that on average, less than 2 leaks were found during that survey, during the initial inspection, and less than 1 leak on average thereafter. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct.
What is and he uses that study, does he not, to imply that leaks are not so common and Eldar is not so efficacious. Is that correct?
That's what's included, yes.
What's your response to that general conclusion?
Yeah, so I think using the number of leaks is an inappropriate way of estimating emissions or the efficacy of Eldar. I think particularly because it's really the magnitude of the emissions rather than the number of leaks. And also, many emission sources can be intermittent. So just because during a follow-up survey, there's a small number of leaks does not mean that there isn't a high potential to emit from that site.
And thank you. And in your testimony, you discuss studies at well sites and gathering and boosting stations on emissions and leaks from these facilities, correct?
Yes.
And can you please talk a little bit more about the emissions and leaks that have been detected and found at gathering and boosting stations?
Yes. So there have been several recent studies that have looked at methane emissions from gathering and boosting stations, including a EDF-sponsored study with Colorado State University that used site-level measurements to estimate gathering compressor emissions. Also, there's been some subsequent work by Colorado State University looking at component-level emissions and found that these compressors can have leaks and anomalous emissions. And our recent work, including the aerial surveys by Carbon Napper, have found that in the Permian basin, gathering stations are a disproportionately large source of emissions compared to other basins, with the stations themselves accounting for about 25% of the measured methane emissions from large emitters. I think some of these emissions may be permitted emissions due to things like just incomplete combustion, or might be some permitted venting, but I think a lot of it is due to both leaks and then inefficient operations, including things like flares that are not properly burned. So I think particularly what happens in the Permian is there may be pressure issues where some of the gathering pipelines are overpressurized, and there can be anomalous pressure relief venting from these gathering stations causing really high emissions. So I think it's critical that the sites are maintained well, including making sure they're operating under proper pressure so you don't have these large emissions from gathering compressor stations.
What are the implications for the frequency of Eldar inspections given those findings?
Yes, I think the implications are it's critical to have frequent Eldar at gathering stations because they can have anomalous, very high emission events. And a lot of our work has found that these emission events can be short term, maybe a couple of hours or days. So really it's critical that you're continuously looking for problems, doing frequent inspections. And I think even better would be having some kind of continuous monitoring of these facilities to make sure that when operators notice problems that they're fixed very quickly.
Thank you. That's all I have.
All right, thank you. Any other parties or council with questions of Dr. Lyon? Nope, I'll turn then to the board questions. While I'm doing that, if you're an attendee on this platform, please reach out through the chat with any questions. Madam Chair, do you have questions of Dr. Lyon?
Yes, thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Again, thank you, Dr. Lyons, for your testimony. I wanted to go back to, I guess, a question about the 1,000-foot. I know I had asked it earlier in the hearing from another witness, but given your background and some of the studies you've referenced, I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on the proposal of the frequent inspections within 1,000 feet and versus, say, 500 feet or 2,000 feet. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on the 1,000-foot?
I mean, that is what we agreed on. I'm not the proper person, I believe, to speak to why that distance. I believe my colleague Tammy Thompson may be speaking more about that later.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for your response. And at this point, Madam Hearing Officer, I don't have any other questions.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis.
Yes, I just have a couple of clarifying questions. Was it Dr. Lyons?
Yes.
Want to make sure you give you your credit there. Dr. Lyons, I'm a little confused in your presentation. It seems like methane is being used interchangeably with VOCs for VOCs. And then I think you clarified in there at some point that you're using methane as like a tracer for VOCs to use as an example. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, so EDF's research has been primarily focused on methane emissions. So most of our measurements have used approaches that are specific to methane. We do have some, including the optical gas imaging, that do see VOCs, and the University of Wyoming did measure VOCs and is currently analyzing that data. But generally, all of our research is on methane, and as I said earlier, that since VOCs are co-emitted with methane, I think that the research also applies to VOC emissions.
Is that a direct relationship? Is methane equivalent to VOCs in emissions, or does that require a gas analysis?
Oh, the gas composition can vary widely. So I think in the production field, the VOC content could be maybe over 20–30% in some kind of wet gases, or it could be less than 1% in dry gases, or kind of downstream. So yeah, it greatly varies depending on where you are, which field, and which part of the supply chain.
Okay, so just so I'm clear on making these distinctions, VOCs and NOx are precursors to ozone. Is that correct?
Yes.
Does methane react and turn to ozone as well?
Methane does impact global ozone levels, but I believe it has very small or zero impact on kind of local ozone levels. But my colleague, Dr. Thompson, could speak much more on that issue.
Okay, so at this point, I'm kind of feeling like this is a little out of scope for this rule and what we're supposed to be looking at. So can you just kind of direct me to maybe what I should focus on in your testimony?
Yeah, so I think kind of any time where I say like that the estimates show that the emissions are higher than government estimates, that also applies to VOCs in addition to methane. So while most of the research papers were comparing methane, if you use approaches, kind of bottom-up approaches with VOCs, you get similar underestimates. So I think the general findings apply whether you're talking about methanes or VOCs. And some of the studies, like the OGI surveys, are really looking at total hydrocarbons, including methane and VOCs.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. And then the other thing I wanted to clarify was I think you were contending that more inspections were necessary. And then later on, you were discussing some of the biggest issues with leaks on facilities was general maintenance and lack of general maintenance that contributed to leaks. So I was hoping that maybe you could draw a distinction for me between the difference between frequent inspections and general maintenance.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I feel that it's not a clear distinction, and that often I think that leak detection and repair should be viewed more comprehensively by operators and regulators as not just looking for equipment leaks, but also looking for underlying problems, including maintenance issues that could lead to future emissions. So I think a robust program to reduce emissions would include these really comprehensive surveys for looking for emissions and underlying problems that may require longer term solutions, such as changing equipment on the site.
I guess in my mind, when I think of an inspection, to me, it should be official. That's what I feel like we're talking about here is you conduct an inspection, it becomes a record, and you can have it pulled for an inspection by an agency or something like that, but it's an official record. Whereas general maintenance would just be the day-to-day job at a facility. So I'm not sure I understand those differences in your assertion. So I mean, if you can clarify it for me, great. If not, that's okay. I'm done with my questions.
Yeah, no, I understand the point about having official inspections and requirements, but I would hope that the record keeping requirements would be structured in a way that the operators are collecting data that also includes the maintenance status. And I think that would be advantageous not only to the regulators, but would help the operators make sure that the equipment is being properly maintained. And that Eldar record keeping process could have advantages to the company.
And do you feel that the current rule meets that as far as maintenance record keeping?
I'm not familiar with the details in the record keeping requirements.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. No more questions.
Thank you. Member Bitzer?
My question was already asked, so I'm good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member Garcia?
No questions right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Honker?
No questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Did any of that prompt redirect for you, Ms. Paranos?
Yes, just one couple questions. Dr. Lyon, you provided some testimony in response to Mr. Curtis's questions regarding the time of day that the measurements were taken. Is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And were most of the measurements taken during the daytime?
Yes, they were.
And Mr. Curtis pointed out that the researchers may have observed emissions from maintenance activities occurring during the daytime. Is that correct?
Yes.
And do you believe that leak detection and repair programs can help reduce excess emissions that stem from, for example, an improperly conducted maintenance activity?
Yes, as I just stated, I believe that Eldar can really be a more comprehensive process that's not just identifying leaks, but they're really looking at the entire emissions profile of the site, including the maintenance. So you could perhaps see if scheduled maintenance had not been performed or was done improperly. I think that is very useful information. So I think that by doing these inspections, you can not only reduce leaks, but really find any kind of operational inefficiencies that would benefit the operator to fix.
Thank you, Dr. Lyon. And you did testify earlier today that EDF converted the New Mexico specific methane inventory that is based on the EDF methane measurements to VOCs. Is that correct?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, is EDF recommending any specific direct methane control requirements in this proceeding?
No.
To your knowledge, are we only relying on estimates of VOCs as the basis for our cost effectiveness analyses?
Yes.
Thank you. I have no more questions for Dr. Lyon.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Paranos and Dr. Lyon.
Thank you.
I believe we can excuse you for the moment.
Next witness will be Hillary Hull.
Thank you. Ms. Hull, I see you on the screen. Would you spell your name for the transcript, please?
Yes, it's Hillary, Hillary, Hull, Hull.
Thank you. Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And don't forget the exhibits, Ms. Paranos.
Yes, absolutely. Madam Hearing Officer, Hillary Hull will be relying on EDF exhibits A, P, which is her resume, C, E, H, Q, R, T, U, V, X, Y, Z, double A, double B, double C, double D, SS, JJJ, and I. Ms. Hull, where are you employed?
Before we get started, actually, could I get screen sharing privileges, please? All right, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Great. Hillary, where are you employed?
Sorry, one little technical issue. I am Director of Research and Analytics for the Environmental Defense Fund.
And what is your educational background?
I have a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Texas at Austin and a master's degree in environmental engineering with a specialty in atmosphere and energy from Stanford University.
And can you provide the board with a brief overview of your work experience?
Yes, I've spent the past 7 years developing and managing analytics and policy for EDF's state, federal, and international oil and gas and natural advocacy efforts. This includes regulatory advocacy, emissions inventory compilation, data and economic analysis, technical support for rulemaking and regulation, and policy analysis and development. And prior to working at EDF, I was a senior project engineer for Environmental Resources Management, which is an environmental consulting firm.
Thank you. And is EDF's Exhibit P an accurate copy of your CV?
Yes.
And did you submit both direct and rebuttal testimony on Eldar?
Yes.
And are exhibits SS and JJJ correct copies of your direct and rebuttal testimony, or do you have any corrections to either of those testimonies?
Yes, we have one correction to my rebuttal testimony with respect to the estimated foregone reductions we calculated would accrue if NMED did not require inspections for existing transmission stations that I will explain in my testimony today.
Thank you, Ms. Hull. Could you please summarize the additional VOC benefits that will accrue to people of New Mexico that live within 1,000 feet of a well site pursuant to EDF's Eldar proximity proposal?
Our proposal is highly cost effective and will result in the removal of an additional 3,600 tons of VOC on top of the reductions that the application of the NMD proposal alone would achieve. It will also secure important co-benefits by reducing 14,300 tons of methane and 150 tons of hazardous air pollutant annually. Importantly, it will protect the health of over 35,000 New Mexicans, many of whom are particularly vulnerable to the deleterious health effects caused by exposure to ozone and toxic air pollution.
Thank you. And can you please summarize the opinions in your rebuttal testimony regarding a comparison of the NMED and MoGA Eldar proposals?
Yes. First, NMED's estimate of the compliance cost of its proposed Eldar requirements is very conservative. For my analysis, the per well site cost of conducting semi-annual inspections is 30% lower than ERG's estimate. Second, NMoGA's estimated per well site costs are grossly inflated. NMoGA's estimate of the cost of conducting inspections is magnitudes higher than NMED's, EPA's, the Colorado Air Pollution Control Division, or EDF estimates. For example, NMoGA's estimate of the per well site cost to conduct semi-annual inspections is 286% higher than EDF's estimate, between 168 and 228% higher than EPA's, and 169% higher than NMED's. Third, NMoGA's proposal to decrease the frequency of inspections at well sites and compressor stations will result in the release of thousands of additional tons of volatile organic compounds and methane to the atmosphere annually. These emissions contribute to unhealthy levels of ozone pollution and the climate crisis. Importantly, frequent Eldar, as NMED has proposed, can curb this cost effectively.
Ms. Hull, this is Felicia. Would you please slow down a little bit? You speed
Sure.
up when you read.
Thank you. I'd like to turn now to EDF's proposal to increase leak inspections at well sites located within 1,000 feet of occupied places. How many additional tons of volatile organic compounds will our proposal remove from the atmosphere annually if adopted?
I estimate our proposal will result in additional 3,600 tons of VOC reductions annually.
And you mentioned some co-benefits associated with that proposal. What would those be?
Yes, our proposal will also result in 14,300 tons of methane and 150 tons of hazardous air pollutant reductions annually.
And did EDF prepare a New Mexico specific inventory of methane and VOC emissions that incorporated data from the direct measurement studies?
Yes, as discussed in my direct testimony, EDF prepared a specific New Mexico VOC inventory that we use to estimate the baseline emissions that can be abated by Eldar and the reductions that frequent instrument-based inspections can achieve. This inventory is based on observed measured emissions in New Mexico and in other US oil and gas basins, where scientists have observed significantly higher emissions than traditional bottom-up inventories reflect.
Thank you. And were you able to estimate the populations who would be protected by our Eldar proximity proposal?
Yes, we estimate that over 2,700 children under the age of 5, more than 4,500 adults 65 years or older, more than 5,700 people living in poverty, and 19,000 people of color, including over 5,800 Native Americans, all live within 1,000 feet of a well site. Additionally, those living in close proximity to these well sites have health conditions that could be exacerbated by additional air pollution. These include more than 3,800 adults with asthma, over 2,200 adults with coronary heart disease, almost 2,600 with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and more than 1,200 adults who have experienced or are at risk of a stroke. My direct testimony explains the methodology I used to assess the demographics of persons protected by our proposal.
Thank you. And did you also estimate the cost effectiveness of our proposal?
Yes, I did. Using the methodology I described in my written and direct and rebuttal testimony, I estimate that our proposal can be conducted at a cost of $894 per ton of VOC reduced within the proximity boundary. This increases the overall statewide cost effectiveness of Eldar from $317 per ton of VOC reduced per the state's proposal to $349 per ton of VOC reduced, accounting for increased frequency within that proximity boundary. This does not account for savings of gas that some operators can save by fixing leaks. Considering quarterly and monthly inspections separately, this comes to $576 per ton VOC reduced for monthly inspections within the boundary, and $1,351 per ton VOC reduced for quarterly inspections within the boundary.
Thank you. And can you explain why our proposal makes the NMED's proposed Eldar program more cost effective?
Yes, adoption of our proposal increases pollutant reductions at 3,365 well sites in the county subject to NMED's proposal, and it increases those pollutant reductions at those sites by 73%. As noted above, we estimate our proposal will result in an additional 3,600 tons of VOC removed from the atmosphere annually. These additional reductions, when compared to the overall cost, makes the overall cost effectiveness of the NMED Eldar program lower.
Thank you. And did you compare our estimate, EDF's estimate, of the cost effectiveness of our Eldar proximity proposal to quarterly and monthly inspection programs adopted by other states?
Yes, I did. EDF estimates that statewide quarterly inspections, including those both within and outside of the proposed 1,000-foot proximity boundary, will cost only $187 per ton VOC reduced overall, and our proposal increases overall statewide Eldar cost effectiveness from $317 per ton VOC reduced to $349 per ton of VOC reduced, which is highly cost effective to cost benefit analysis from other jurisdictions. For example, in its 2014 cost benefit analysis, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, CDPHE, found quarterly inspections of production facilities to be between $1,019 and $1,268 per ton of VOC reduced, and monthly inspections to be between $2,235 and $2,752 per ton VOC reduced. The EPA CTGs estimate that quarterly inspections at well sites cost between $3,453 and $15,929 per ton VOC reduced without savings, and $2,619 and $15,064 per ton VOC reduced with savings. As I noted in my written testimony, both of these cost effectiveness calculations are somewhat outdated. The rules were promulgated in 2014 and 2016 respectively, whereas the EDF cost calculation accounts for information taken from more recent compliance reports submitted by operators to the EPA, which reflect real-world inspection metrics. Additionally, the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, requires quarterly inspections at all well site facilities. The CARB cost effectiveness analysis associated with its rule finds that quarterly inspections can be implemented at a cost of between $575 and $650 per ton of methane. Using the average methane to VOC ratio in New Mexico, this translates to a cost of between $2,300 and $2,600 per ton VOC reduced. Note that this is also higher than EDF's estimate for the cost per ton associated with our proximity proposal. In sum, a comparison of quarterly and monthly inspection requirements adopted by other state air quality regulators underscores the cost effectiveness of quarterly and monthly inspections.
And is our proximity-based proposal based on rules adopted by other jurisdictions?
It is, and I believe this speaks to one of the questions asked earlier. In 2019, the Colorado Air Quality AQCC promulgated a rule that requires operators to inspect well sites located within 1,000 feet of occupied areas more frequently than facilities located outside of this radius. Specifically, the Colorado rule requires operators inspect well sites monthly if the well site has actual uncontrolled VOC emissions of 12 ton per year or greater. Operators must inspect well sites quarterly if the well site has actual uncontrolled VOC emissions of between 2 and 12 ton per year. Our proposal mirrors Colorado's in that we used the same 1,000-foot radius, the same definition of occupied areas, and the same inspection frequencies of quarterly or monthly. Colorado uses a different metric than NMED to bucket the well sites for purposes of its Eldar program. For example, the NMED proposal uses potential to emit VOCs, whereas Colorado uses actual uncontrolled VOC emissions. Colorado's tiered Eldar program also buckets well sites into different inspection tiers than NMED. For example, Colorado requires semi-annual inspections for well sites with actual uncontrolled VOCs between 2 and 12 ton per year, whereas NMED proposes semi-annual inspections for well sites with a PTE of between 2 and 5 ton per year of VOC. Thus, our proposal differs from Colorado in terms of the metric used to bucket wells into the quarterly or monthly inspection frequencies, but otherwise mirrors Colorado's rule in terms of requiring operators to conduct more frequent inspections at well sites located near occupied places within that 1,000-foot boundary than the rules otherwise require.
Thank you. And turning now to NMED's estimate of the cost effectiveness of its Eldar requirements, did you conduct a review and analysis of NMED's cost effectiveness analysis for its Eldar proposal?
Yes.
And could you please describe your analysis?
Sure. So in preparation for filing my direct and rebuttal testimony, I reviewed ERG's Eldar reductions and costs VOC spreadsheet, which is NMED Exhibit 69. Using more recent information regarding inspection costs, I calculate a per well site cost of $1,658 for semi-annual Eldar. This number represents the full cost of implementing an Eldar program in-house. In other words, it includes Eldar setup costs, survey costs, repair costs, and record keeping and reporting costs. This number is 30% lower than that assumed by ERG. ERG relied on site-level data taken from EPA's 2016 Control Techniques Guidelines to estimate the cost of conducting annual, semi-annual, and quarterly inspections. EPA assumed $1,318 for annual OGI, $2,285 for semi-annual OGI, and $4,220 for quarterly OGI, all using 2012 Thus, ERG assumed the same costs as assumed by EPA in 2016, except ERG scaled the cost for inflation using the Chemical Engineering Plant Cost Index from $2012 to $2019. So this resulted in estimates of $1,370 for annual OGI, $2,375 for semi-annual OGI, and $4,385 for quarterly OGI. Based on their site-level emission estimates, ERG assumed all sites would conduct semi-annual Eldar at an annual cost of $2,375, and that is in 2019 dollars. For my analysis, I compared the ERG per well site cost to more recent 2020 EPA estimated costs contained in EPA's TSD for its NSPS reconsideration. In 2020, EPA estimated the per well site cost for conducting semi-annual inspections at non-low producing well sites to be $2,384 and $1,949 at low producing well sites. Notably, this estimate is lower than that used by ERG in its Eldar spreadsheet. In my opinion, this comparison indicates that NMED is overestimating costs. I also compared NMED's average cost per ton to conduct Eldar inspections with estimates conducted by the Colorado Air Pollution Control Division. In 2014, Colorado adopted a similar inspection program to that proposed by NMED. Colorado's program, like NMED's proposal, requires differing inspection frequencies based on a facility's emissions. In 2014, Colorado estimated the average cost effectiveness of conducting instrument-based inspections at well sites to be $1,259 per ton for well production facilities. This assumed a tiered program consisting of monthly, quarterly, annual, and once-in-a-lifetime inspections. NMED estimates the average cost per ton of VOC to conduct Eldar inspections at New Mexico facilities subject to its proposal to be $3,506. While not exactly apples to apples, a comparison of the NMED and Colorado estimates demonstrates NMED's estimate is conservative. Information submitted by operators to EPA in compliance with EPA's Eldar requirements further underscores the likelihood that ERG has overestimated costs. As indicated in my direct testimony, in 2018, MJ Bradley analyzed approximately 120 reports containing compliance data resulting from Eldar surveys at 3,832 well sites conducted by operators in 2017 and 2018. 3,202 of the well sites surveyed contain information on survey time. These reports indicate that average time to conduct an Eldar survey is going down as the operators have been implementing state and federal Eldar programs. The reports reviewed by MJ Bradley indicate an average Eldar inspection takes approximately 1.25 to 1.6 hours per well, including travel time. In addition, information from a new study demonstrates that methane mitigation industry, including third-party contractors who can conduct Eldar inspections, is growing. Indeed, many of these firms are using efficient screening methods such as aerial surveys that can screen multiple facilities for leaks in a much shorter time frame than can be achieved using ground-based OGI methods. Per a recent report by DATU Research, the number of methane mitigation service firms nearly doubled in the last 4 years alone. Per this report, DATU Research surveyed 98 firms between June 29th and July 21st, 2021. More than half of the respondents stated they could at least serve 100 more well sites per day than they currently serve. Nearly half noted they could scale up to serve more than 500 well sites per day using advanced methane detection technologies, such as fixed sensors, airplanes, or satellites. The rapid growth in advanced methane detection technologies is likely to significantly reduce the cost of Eldar compliance. NMED's proposal allows operators to obtain approval to use alternative equipment leak monitoring plans in Section 116D. Most likely, many of these plans will rely on a combination of fixed sensors, aerial surveys, and/or satellites. In sum, recent data regarding actual inspection time and the emergence of more efficient Eldar inspection methods indicates that NMED's estimate of the cost associated with conducting ground-based OGI or Method 21 vehicle inspections is likely quite conservative.
Thank you, Hillary. And did you also analyze MoGA's estimate of the cost effectiveness of NMED's proposed Eldar program?
I did.
And do you agree with MoGA's cost estimates?
No, I do not.
Could you please explain the basis for that opinion?
Yes, MoGA's cost estimates are significantly higher than recent EPA estimates, as well as ERG estimates, and 286% higher than our estimate. MoGA's higher cost estimates are based in part on comments the American Petroleum Institute submitted to EPA in 2015 on EPA's 2016 Draft Control Techniques Guidelines. In the draft CTGs, EPA estimated a per well site inspection cost of $2,230 per well site. This is very similar to the per well site cost used by ERG to analyze an MED proposal. API increased this estimate approximately threefold to over $6,400 per site. This number, I'm sorry, I have a slide that lays this out a little bit. This number dramatically overstates the cost of Eldar and was notably rejected by EPA when it finalized the 2016 CTGs. As a basis for this threefold increase, API presumed that all operators would create their own in-house Eldar survey program rather than employ third-party providers. This assumption inflates the cost of implementing an Eldar program. For small operators, it is often more economical to hire a third-party contractor to conduct these leak inspections than to purchase its own IR camera and the other equipment necessary to conduct the inspections themselves. For example, when Colorado first adopted its Eldar program in 2014, it assumed that operators who have less than 500 wells would hire a third-party contractor to conduct Eldar, as they would not be able to fully utilize an IR camera. API also used basin level averages to imply that for each survey, an operator would travel approximately 340 miles round trip. However, this estimate seems extraordinarily high.
Thank you. And did MoGA provide any support for how, if at all, API's comments to EPA are applicable to this proceeding?
No.
And did MoGA propose a less protective well site Eldar program than NMED?
Yes, MoGA's proposal requires annual Eldar at wellhead sites emitting less than 10 ton per year VOC, semi-annual Eldar at wellhead sites emitting between 10 and 25 ton per year VOC, and quarterly Eldar at wellhead sites emitting more than 25 ton per year of VOC. This increases the emission thresholds triggering each Eldar tier by 5-fold compared to NMED's proposal. NMED proposes wellhead sites emitting less than 2 ton per year VOC conduct annual Eldar. Well sites emit between 2 and 5 ton per year VOC conduct semi-annual Eldar. And those emitting more than 5 ton per year VOC conduct quarterly Eldar, as I've shown in this chart.
And did you estimate the amount of pollution that would be emitted if the board adopted NMOGA's weakened Eldar proposal for well sites?
Yes, EDF estimates that MoGA's proposal would result in 23,000 additional tons of VOC and also 79,000 additional tons of methane left unabated annually. I described the methodology used to estimate these tons in my direct and rebuttal testimony.
And did MoGA also propose a less protective Eldar program than NMED for gathering and boosting compressor stations?
Yes, NMED's proposal requires quarterly Eldar for compressor stations emitting less than 25 ton per year VOC, and then monthly Eldar for compressor stations emitting equal to or greater than 25 ton per year VOC. However, MoGA's proposal decreases the inspection frequency from monthly to quarterly for compressor stations emitting 25 ton per year VOC or more, and from quarterly to semi-annual for those emitting below 25 ton per year VOC.
And did you estimate the amount of pollution that would be emitted from gathering and boosting stations if the board adopted MoGA's weakened Eldar proposal?
Yes, using the methodology described in my rebuttal testimony, I estimate MoGA's proposal will result in up to 8,400 additional tons of VOC and up to 34,000 additional tons of methane leaked annually using EDF emission estimates. Using 2020 EPA emission estimates, I find that MoGA's proposal results in 680 additional tons of VOCs and 2,700 additional tons of methane leaked annually.
And does your analysis indicate the need for frequent instrument-based inspections at both well sites and gathering and boosting compressor stations?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. And then lastly, do you support NMED's proposed Eldar requirements for both well sites and gathering and boosting compressor stations?
Yes, I do. Based on my analysis, NMED's Eldar requirements for well sites and gathering and boosting compressor stations is highly cost effective and will remove 153,000 tons of VOCs from the atmosphere annually. In addition, it has co-benefits related to the reduction of 531,000 tons of methane annually.
Thank you. That concludes Ms. Hull's summary of her direct and rebuttal pre-filed written testimony. I do have a few questions on Sir rebuttal.
Okay, thank you.
Hillary, did you hear Kinder Morgan's testimony earlier today regarding a joint proposal to inspect compressor stations in the transmission segment between EDF and Kinder Morgan?
Yes, we agree. EDF and Kinder Morgan are jointly proposing a minimum quarterly inspection requirement in compliance with EPA requirements.
Thank you. And are you aware of testimony earlier, actually, I guess it was last week now, regarding the potential impact on stripper wells of NMED's proposed rules, including the leak detection and repair requirements?
Yes.
And have you conducted any kind of analysis regarding the ownership of stripper wells in New Mexico?
Yes.
Could you please provide a summary of that analysis to the board?
Sure. EDF pulled data from New Mexico OCD and our methane inventory in order to analyze, well, our methane inventory, which we converted into the VOC inventory, in order to analyze ownership of stripper wells. According to NMOCD, as of 6/28/2021, there are 34,158 active oil and gas stripper wells statewide, or 62% of currently active wells in New Mexico. Production from active stripper wells makes up about 3% of oil production and 5% of gas production, according to the Operator Annual Production Report of 2020. However, operators who own active stripper wells are responsible for 99.6% of statewide oil production and 97% of gas production.
And Ms. Hull, in your opinion, is the implication of your analysis showing that operators who own active stripper wells are responsible for 99.6% of oil production and 97% of gas production statewide? I'm sorry, I misstated that. What is your opinion of the implication of your analysis?
In my opinion, this demonstrates that companies who operate stripper wells also operate many higher producing wells. This would suggest that even if an operator chose to permanently plug and abandon a particular low producing well or wells, the company would still generate considerable income from its higher producing wells.
Thank you. And in your analysis, did you also look at the emissions from stripper wells?
Yes, I did. Using our well site inventory, we also estimate that stripper wells are responsible for disproportionately large portion of emissions, over 22% compared to their low share of production, as David Lyon previously discussed. This indicates the need for frequent instrument-based inspections at these well sites to identify abnormal operating conditions that result in excess venting or leaking.
Thank you so much, Hillary. I have no further questions for Ms. Hull.
Thank you. Ms. Hull, would you stop sharing for just a moment, please?
Certainly. We'll figure it out.
Madam Hearing Officer?
Yes, Mr. Heiser?
I have a couple questions. And is it Ms. Hall or Dr. Hall? I'm sorry, I missed that section of your intro.
Ms. is fine.
Ms. Hall, thank you for your presentation. You repeated a couple of times that MoGA was using the API number for its costing. Where in its testimony or anywhere has MoGA adopted that for its actual cost analysis?
My understanding was that MoGA did not actually adopt it, but used it as input for its underlying assumptions. So,
isn't it a bit misleading to tell the board that if we didn't use that number, that our estimates were 286% high?
Objection. Objection. MoGA absolutely relied on API's comments. They both submitted 2 separate exhibits that are API's comments that include detailed critiques of EPA's cost estimates for the CTGs. And they relied on the information in those exhibits in their comments, which they included in their red line of the NAMD proposal. They specifically referred to those APA comments and indicated that based on those comments, NAMD has underestimated costs, and that is precisely what Ms. Hull is critiquing.
Ms. Hall, I believe, testified that MoGA's cost estimates that were presented on a pound per ton or dollar per ton basis were 286% high. And I don't believe that MoGA ever did any such thing. And I was asking her to show where we did.
All right, it was posed in an argumentative way, Mr. Heiser. If you would please rephrase that question.
So, Ms. Hall, is there a place in the MoGA testimony where MoGA was calculating a dollar per ton cost of the Eldar proposal, where it used a number for the base cost of Eldar other than the ERG number? Understanding that MoGA may have used a different tonnage for the impact of the Eldar process.
Not committed the MoGA testimony to memory. So I would need to look.
Okay, in page 7 of your direct testimony, you talk about trying to come up with the most current information and developing your ground up inventory for purposes of calculating PTEs. Did you use the greenhouse gas reporting program inventory for that purpose?
Partly, yeah. So the inventory is compiled using various sources of available data, one of which is the greenhouse gas reporting program.
Okay. In your direct testimony at page 11, you show some calculations about and calculate, I believe, a $349 per ton VOC produced. Do you have an exhibit or anything which actually shows your work and how you went from the cost to the final value? And if so, could you direct me to what that exhibit is?
Sorry, are you asking if I've laid out an exhibit with the calculation?
Yes.
I don't know that the underlying calculation is included in the exhibit, but I know that the data is.
So you supplied data, but you didn't actually show the complete calculation train. Is that what you're saying? I'm sorry, I didn't hear your answer.
I have to check.
Okay, that's fine. Take your time.
So just to move things along, I believe Ms. Hull in both her direct and her rebuttal pre-filed written testimony provided a detailed explanation of the methodology that she used to estimate costs, both in order to estimate the cost of EDF's Eldar proximity proposal and also to provide a critique of NAMD's cost estimates as well as MoGA's cost estimates.
I understand, Ms. Paranos, reading her testimony that she did provide details of what she did. I was just wondering if she ever actually presented an exhibit that walked through each stage because I was having trouble following everything that had been done in her testimony. And so it's mostly to help me understand her testimony that I was looking for an exhibit. But if we don't have one readily available, I accept that and can move on.
I'll offer that it's a pretty standard cost benefit calculation. So looking at the total impact of the cost of the proposal and then looking at the total impact of the reductions and dividing the two.
Okay, and in that cost benefit analysis that, as you've just described it, how do you deal with the variations in the PTE of the underlying facility?
We approached it a couple of ways. We looked at facilities with and without what we consider to be super emitters.
Okay, so you did two calculations, one including and one excluding super emitters.
Yes, and then the one that we ended up including is the one that excludes super emitters because we think that's closest to how an operator would calculate its PTE.
Okay. In slide 5, I believe, of your testimony that you did today, You showed that you included facilities with the PTE 0 through, I think, 2 or 5. How did you handle the problem of a PTE 0 facility in your calculation?
We included those.
Well, wouldn't the control cost of a facility with a PTE of 0 be effectively infinite?
Yeah, we're looking at it in aggregate
Okay.
for the entire range of that bucket, I guess.
Okay. And did I hear correctly in your testimony that you believe the current cost of an Eldar program is about $1,658 if it's done semi-annually? Is that for a well site?
Hold on. Yes, there's a per well site cost of $1,658 for semi-annual Eldar.
And can you tell us again what the source was and the time frame or region of the country?
Source of that
Of
calculus?
that particular, piece of information.
Yeah, that comes from EPA. The basis is the 2020 EPA reconsideration TSD, and we've revised that number slightly to reflect data coming in from the compliance reports submitted to EPA for Quad OA.
Okay. And throughout this testimony, a couple places you referred to an EPA 2020 cost. Is that coming from that reconsideration TSD?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And then you testified, I think this was from, and you cited a company's name as the data for that an average time for Eldar now is decreased to 1.25 to 1.6 hours. Was that on a per well basis?
It's per well, and it includes travel time.
Okay. And then in much of I think that was, maybe it was after slide 11, but you talked about advanced technologies that are being used. Would those be actual method 21s, or those would be different technologies using OGI or other techniques?
Those would be different technologies. So likely satellite or tower mounted or even drone based. There are various technologies out there that are would be considered in that category.
Okay. Those are the questions I had for you. I appreciate your clarification on those points. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heiser. Mr. Rose?
And let me unmute first. Ms. Hull, just some questions for clarification. If I heard your testimony correctly, you talked about the EDF proposal being more protective. And I was just trying to figure out what you meant by more protective. Were you referring to concentrations below the ozone NACs or something else?
I was speaking about the impact of the VOC on VOC and other pollutants on the health of the populations within the boundary.
And is that related to exceedances of the federal ozone NACs or exposure to some other contaminants that are being emitted from these sites?
It's really in reference to all of them, any of the pollutants that are associated with oil and gas that are creating negative health impacts.
And in terms of those health impacts, I assume that if I had questions about that, I should ask Dr. Thompson about what those health impacts are and how that's considered in terms of your proposal.
I was going to suggest just that, yes.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Ms. Fox, I think I saw you on screen there. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I just have a couple of questions for Ms. Hull. Hello, Ms. Hull. My name is Tanis Fox. I'm with Western Environmental Law Center, and I represent the parties that we are calling ourselves clean air advocates in this proceeding, and thank you for your testimony. Ms. Hull, you're familiar with Colorado's rules on Eldar, correct?
Yes, I am.
Specifically, you're familiar with the Colorado rule that's been put into place that mirrors EDF's and Cleaner Advocates proximity proposal. Is that correct?
Sorry, yes, I am.
Do you know how long that rule in Colorado has been in effect? Approximately.
I do not.
As the Colorado Air Quality Control Commission recently proposed new Eldar frequencies for oil and gas facilities to control ozone precursors and hydrocarbons.
Yes.
And what are the new Eldar, do you know the new Eldar frequencies that are being proposed?
Not off the top of my head. Sorry, no, not off the top of my head.
Do you know if the new rules require Eldar frequencies that are the same or similar to the ones that EDF is proposing in its proximity proposal to apply to facilities that are close to, that are within disproportionately impacted communities?
Yes, they are.
And do you know in general what is meant by a disproportionately impacted community?
Yes, so there would be a community that is impacted more so by the production and processing, transport of oil and gas than others. So those within closer proximity would be disproportionately impacted because they would have higher exposure to those pollutants.
And so are the frequencies that are being proposed for facilities close to disproportionately impact communities, are those monthly and quarterly inspection frequencies?
Yes, they are.
And so the Colorado Air Quality Control Commission is proposing to extend its Eldar frequencies that now apply to facilities that are within 1,000 feet of occupied areas more broadly to disproportionately impact communities. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. James, I see you.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Good afternoon, Ms. Hall. I am Daniel James. I'm with the University of New Mexico Law Clinic, representing Center for Civic Policy and NAVA Education Project. I just had a few questions for you. So, Ms. Hall, in your testimony, you mentioned it is estimated that over 35,000 New Mexicans live within 1,000 feet of a well site. Of those, approximately 19,000 are people of color, including over 5,800 Native Americans. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is the percentage of people of color, including Native Americans, living within 1,000 feet of a well site proportional to the demographics of New Mexico residents living within the state?
No, it is not. It's disproportionate. A higher percentage of people of color and Native Americans live within 1,000 feet of a well site than represented in New Mexico as a whole. And I think that answers Tanis's question from earlier as well.
Thank you. And do you have any data or any understanding of whether marginalized populations you described live in close proximity to wells on state lands as opposed to wells within the Navajo Nation?
Yes, there are populations from both that live within those proximities. Depending on the parameter you're looking at, it varies, but about 90% live on non-tribal lands and about 10% live on tribal lands within those boundaries.
Great. And Ms. Hull, the board has previously inquired about regulations on the Navajo Nation. Are you aware of whether the Navajo Nation has taken any actions to address emissions from wells on the Navajo Nation territory?
Yes, they have proposed a comprehensive regulatory program for new and existing facilities without any exemptions for low producing or low emitting wells.
Great, thank you. And if the EIB adopts a less stringent frequency of leak inspections at wellhead facilities as proposed by MoGA, is it your opinion that people of color and Native Americans will experience additional exposure to toxic volatile organic compounds?
Yes, less stringent frequency of leak inspections at wellhead facilities could result in up to 23,000 tons of additional VOCs leaked into the atmosphere from wellhead facilities located in areas that are predominantly occupied by people of color and Native Americans.
Thank you. And Ms. Hall, have you read through the rebuttal testimony of Leanne Hill?
Yes.
Based on Ms. Hill's testimony and your knowledge of the demographic makeup of the populations living within 1,000 feet of a well site, do you have any opinion on whether people of color, Native Americans are exposed to greater health risks from pollution from oil and gas production?
Yes, people of color and Native Americans living within 1,000 feet of a well site are disproportionately higher risk of health conditions exacerbated by additional air pollution, which includes asthma, heart disease, and cancers.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Madam Hearing Officer, we have no further questions for Ms. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. James. Any other party have questions of Ms. Hall? I don't see anyone else's screen. I'll turn now to questions from the board. While the board is asking its questions, if you're an attendee on this platform, please reach out through the chat with any questions. Madam Chair?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer, and thank you, Ms. Hall, for your testimony. I just wanted to kind of add to what the previous legal counsel was talking about in terms of some of the demographics. I noted in your written testimony that you utilized the U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey 5-year estimates. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And are you and also the Senator CDC 2020 Places data set as well?
Correct.
Is that being from one of the Native American communities, I sort of have a unique perspective on this in terms of those data sets. Do you know about the difficulties or the challenges for gathering accurate data counts and population for Native American communities?
I would imagine that it certainly exists, yes. I don't have any data to support that assertion, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I didn't know if you took that into consideration because of the difficulty and challenges in the past of undercounting in Native American communities.
Unfortunately, there wasn't really any way to account for that quantitatively. So it's more of just something we have to note. But yeah, unfortunately, we just had to use what was available.
Okay, all right. So if it was undercounted, that means it's an underestimate of the potential impact to populations, and in particular in minority or Native American communities. Is that?
Yes, I think it would be a safe assumption that it could be conservative.
Okay, thank you for that. In addition to that, I did ask your colleague, Dr. Lyons, this question earlier. Let me pull it up here. So I was, again, based on the various studies that you've referenced and your experience, can you elaborate more on the proposal of the frequent inspections within 1,000 feet? Why was 1,000 foot chosen instead of, say, 500, 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet? Could you elaborate more?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most direct answer is that it's mirrored on Colorado's rule that does the same, right? And Colorado had, pulled together analytics to look at the impacts on facilities and populations in that boundary as well. And so we sort of mirrored what they had implemented.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And so I think that's all I have for right now. Thank you, Ms. Hall.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis.
Yes, I apologize, Ms. Hall, but I wasn't able to catch the full testimony, so I'll have to look back at it. So I don't have any questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Bitzer.
Yeah, first of all, I think it takes a Stanford grad to throw a big fancy word out there like, what was it, deleterious? I had to look that up, being a Berkeley boy and all. So anyway, nice credentials. Has anybody considered that steal one from Bob Dylan that helps to know which way the wind blows? Because you got a CEP around a well that's circular, but if we got a prevailing wind, and in New Mexico we tend to have them, we put the windmills pointing this way because the wind's always coming from that way. Wouldn't it make more sense to have kind of an oval area where you have schools or kids that's downwind of typically downwind that maybe extends the same square footage about what, about a 3.14 million square foot plume area that you might want to consider. Has anyone ever looked at that?
I am not sure. I would think that it's part of the consideration that went into the selection of the 1,000-foot barrier, you know, as well as the notion that the wind changes. So, you know, in order probably to be the most protective, I would think it would just be a circle naturally. But I am unaware of investigation otherwise.
Okay, that's the only thing. It just occurred to me because we were seeing maps, yours, which was very interesting. You had wells around the school and the community, and that photo, and then the previous presenter had these photos, satellite type photos of plumes heading in one direction. I was like, oh, I know that's a typical wind pattern. I'll bet the actual downwind damage is being done beyond 1,000 feet in that direction and not a few hundred feet in the other direction. So, but of course, it doesn't always blow the same direction. So I guess this is sort of an average throw in a dart type of shape. Anyway, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Member Garcia.
Yes, thank you. I just have one clarifying question, if I may. Ms. Hall, you mentioned that Navajo had proposed a comprehensive program of inspections. That's not in this proceeding, right? Or where was that proposed? For who?
That is not in this proceeding, and I am not privy to the particulars of that proposal. I just know that it is, it has been proposed, and it is, I believe, in the process of being finalized.
Is that Navajo EPA or?
I do not know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Honker.
No questions, thank you.
All right, thank you. Does any of that prompt follow-up with you, Ms. Braños?
I have a quick follow-up.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Sorry, I was wondering if somebody else might bring up this question. I just wanted to go back again in your testimony. Again, just reiterating back from Dr. Lyons' presentation as well, in terms of how we transition from talking about methane to talking about VOCs. So you based some of your analysis on the methane inventory and then utilizing some type of conversion or relationship to transition to VOC inventories calculation. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
I'm happy to elaborate if you'd like.
Yes, can you elaborate on that? I'm still trying to get my head around that.
Yeah, so, you know, as David was mentioning earlier, methane and VOC are co-pollutants for most of these sources. And so what we used was the Western Regional Air Partnership inventory that it had put together. And they had come up with both VOC and methane inventories on a source level by county. So we were able to develop methane to VOC ratios in order to convert our methane inventory into a VOC inventory based on New Mexico specific data. This is not unprecedented, right? EPA similarly uses ratios to convert between methane and VOC in its rulemakings when it discusses the benefits of multi-pollutant versus single pollutant cost for Eldar. So EPA also investigates, what costs look like if you're just looking at reductions of VOC versus VOC plus methane, et cetera. And to do that, it has a standard ratio that it applies as well.
So EPA, so EPA has a standard ratio, but from how you explained it, you utilize New Mexico specific data.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, so it was probably a little different ratio than EPA's. Is that correct?
It was a little bit different, yes, but not significantly. We just wanted to use data that was specific to the state.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer.
Thank you. Ms. Pranos, did any of that raise redirect for you?
No, Madam Hearing Officer.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Hull, for your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer.
Thank you. I saw on the spreadsheet an asterisk by Dr. Thompson's name, and I wasn't sure whether that was intentional or not. But I'm wondering if perhaps we could take Mr. Smitherman next, because he's not available tomorrow. And when I looked at the availability of your witnesses, it seemed that Dr. Thompson might be, if we get to that point. We may still be able to take her today. Is that okay?
I am checking with her right now, but I do believe that she is certainly available this afternoon, and I hope as well tomorrow morning.
Okay.
I haven't gotten a response back, but
Just
yes,
a
thank you.
thumbs up.
Yeah, that is fine.
There she is.
That is fine.
Thank you very much. So let's see, it's 4:22. Where are you, Mr. Heiser?
Okay. I'm here, Madam Hearing Officer.
Hello. We do need to take a break before the 5 o'clock public comment session. I will note that at the moment I have just one public commenter. So accounting for the break, would you want to do that at 4:45, or would you want to do that now and come back?
Honestly, Madam Hearing Officer, whichever you think is better for the board and the court reporter.
All right, I think it's better if we take a break now. Cheryl, is that okay? Yeah. All right, let's take a break now. Come back at 4:40 and do what we can with Mr. Smitherman then. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Thompson, for letting us get Mr. Smitherman in. We really appreciate that.